I am honored to open our second session today. In this session, we will have a chance to see how Dr. de Masi works with his theoretical concepts. He will bring us a detailed presentation of one of his, Francesco, of one of his psychotic patients, and afterwards we will hear a discussion about his presentation. So, שומעים אותי? Okay. So please, Dr. de Masi, you can start your presentation.
Are you ready for another hour? Allora, Francesco's case seems well suited to showing progress and regression in long-term psychoanalytic therapy, and also to underline how important is not to become discouraged by the many difficult moments. I hope that my account of this analysis allows the clinical material to be connected up with the concept I have sought to discuss in the previous lecture. Beginning of treatment. When Francesco came to me, he was about 30 years old. He had been abroad in Germany doing an in-company master's program, and while there had a psychotic breakdown and was hospitalized. Once back in Italy, he was under the care of a psychiatrist with a medium dose of psychotropic drugs and continued his therapy for many years during his psychoanalysis. Before the beginning of his delusion, he was convinced that a brilliant career lay ahead of him. The breakthroughs he was to make would lead others to see him as a savior of mankind. To prove to himself how great he actually was, he felt the need to win girls over. On one occasion, a girl, perhaps irritated by his insistence, left a small party he had organized and went away with an Arab peer. The following day, Francesco went to object to this person who had stolen his girlfriend. In order to seem more threatening, he had taken an Italian from Sicily along with him to make the Arab believe that he was backed by the mafia. So we see that it was an omnipotent mind organization, manic state of mind, because I think that before the manic state and after the persecution. The delusion proper exploded several weeks later when Francesco, while at a conference in another city, realized that there were 3 Arabs there. Immediately a conspiracy came to mind. The 3 Arabs were there to kill him and avenge their fellow countrymen. A persecutory delusion proper manifests at this point, with that anxiety to the extent that the organizers of the master's program were so concerned that they had Francesco hospitalized. When he came to me, I immediately had the impression that he was in an advanced psychotic state and thought I could not begin an analytic therapy immediately because of his mental condition. He was plain delusional and hallucinated. I therefore decided to see him once a week, face to face, to try to understand that what could develop between the two of us and how, in this case, I could help him. the beginning of therapy. During his first sessions, Francesco, deeply distressed, gave me an alarming and fragmentary account of his persecutory perceptions. Although I was only trying to listen to him without interfering with what he was saying, I found it extremely difficult to follow his speech, but understood that the persecution was expanding right there and then. His enemies were everywhere. They were conspiring to make an attempt on his life, using very diabolic trick in the book. I continued to see him once a week. I was interested in how the psychotic breakdown had arisen and in reconstructing it chronologically. In addition to telling me about the delusion, Francesco also told me, albeit quite patchily, about his life, some episode from his childhood and youth, for instance. I came to learn that before the persecutory delusion that had led to his undergoing therapy, there had been two other alarming episodes. All these facts were of course narrated in fragments during the first months of therapy, which were filled with these distressing accounts of delusion threats that were clearly everywhere all day long. I then began to see the patient face to face twice a week at his request. After approximately 6 months from the beginning of his therapy, during the summer holidays, he took the initiative to go to a tourist resort, and there his delusion grew out of all proportion. Several months later, Francesco asked if he could come 3 times a week, and at this point I suggested lying on the couch, which he did without any difficulty. Subsequently, we increased the number of sessions to 4 per week. During this period, I continued to listen to him carefully. I only gave some meaning to his experiences, to his feeling of terror, and above all, to the megalomaniacal, omnipotent, and murderous character that his persecutors had. At times, I was able to describe to Francesco how his persecutory visions consisted in actual revelations of hidden truths. I had realized that Francesco did not use a thought, but functioned by means of constant, sudden revelations. Things people around him were not free of preconceived ideas, but placed on a set path. During sessions, Francesco did not trust me either. On one occasion, I was included in his delusion. It was when, once our session was over, I left the office quickly, and sitting in a nearby bar, he noted that I was in a hurry. The next day, very hesitantly and visibly distressed, he told me that he had seen me walking quickly, and he thought that I was going to report him to his persecutors, who were waiting for me in a small nearby shop. Worried about the direction that the analysis could have taken, I immediately began to talk to him about the reasons that had led him to believe I could have collaborated with his persecutor. I did not said to him, "You are including me in your..." No, why do you include why? You have to explain me. He replied that I might have done so because I had been threatened by them or paid a huge bribe. While I knew that psychotic transference bore early signs of the main elements of his delusional system, I made him reflect on the fact that he considered me as an emotionless puppet in the hands of his enemies. I repeatedly said that that was not how things were. Some things were possible, others improbable, and others impossible, and that everything was possible only in the omnipotent thought and in an imaginary world. The omnipotence of thought made him believe that anything whatsoever imaginable to him was actually possible. The circumstance confirmed that the organization of delusional thought was like a vortex that, with all its swirling might, swallowed up and destroyed everything that came into its orbit. The death threat was omnipresent. I began to note that the invasion of the delusion happened verbally, very important for this patient. Words, verbal assonance and contiguity links took the place of things and created a connection that endlessly dilated his delusional vision. For example, the father of one of his female friends, who had been to German city where Francesco had attended his master's program, and an engineer who worked in the oil industry, Saudi Arabia being a major producer, immediately became potential assassins and were therefore feared and avoided. Identifying his friend's father with the persecutor occurred via a geographical coincidence, and that of the engineer via verbal association. Saudi Arabia, oil. The persecutory black hole attracted and contaminated people and places who became bearers of terror merely through proximity and verbal assonance. It became increasingly clear that the delusional explosion had been prepared by the grandiose mental state which had driven Francesco to clash with megalomania. Aspiration of a brilliant career had led him to cut ties with the meaningful people in his affective life. He had left his home and friends without feeling much regret. Frustration at not winning the girl over was unbearable, as it had occurred at the height of the megalomaniac expansion, and having transformed the rivalry into a clash with omnipotent, vindictive enemies, he had become an angry victim. We may say that his grandiosity was projected into the rival who, furious about the narcissistic wound caused, was ready to draw an enormous wealth to seek his revenge. What was particular about this therapy was that even though my interpretation on his grandiosity were accepted, the situation did not change. The delusion continued to influence the main aspect of his life, and he was unable to retain the insights gained during his sessions. During this period, which corresponds to the end of the second year of analysis, Francesco spent much of his time at home, under the bed covers, because he felt helpless and perceived the world as a jungle full of malicious beings. My impression was that his megalomaniac competitiveness had torn his mental skin, letting the hated world get beneath it, where it could hate and attack him. Francesco was very alone and complained that no one, not even his old friends, ever contacted him. For this reason, he had decided to organize a party and invite various different people, some mere acquaintances. It ended up being a disaster, as Francesco found himself in a conspirational ambience organized by the CIA and the KGB. In this case, he retrieved himself from his home and he went to his mother for 2 months because he was very afraid of the danger. The intermediate period. In the 5th year of analysis, a period began in which insights were more frequent, and these childhood experiences could be assessed and the infantile origin of his psychosis reconstructed. During the same period, Francesco brought a very meaningful dream. Very important dream, because in this dream there is a narration of his psychotic transformation, like the other dream I saw. He was at the cinema with his parents and some friends over there. During the film, he needed to poo, which he did immediately with great pleasure. No, it's not for delusion, for his childhood. He did immediately with great pleasure. The adults smelt the odor, complained out loud, and at the end of the film they cleaned the excrement. Not one of them asked him about it, or merely said in passing that a sort of thing was not allowed. Francesco connected his dream to the fact that his parent never confronted him and let him live as freely as he wished. For example, as a child, he would split at his grandfather and would not be told off by his father, who would just turn it into humor by saying that he would become dehydrated if he kept it up. In the dream, what struck him was that none of the adults commented of him pooing, and this associated this silence with that of the Arab who had been silent when Francesco objected to what he had done. That silence and the fact that this person did not look him in the eye bothered him afterward to the extent that he feared revenge. My work consisted in making constant comparison within delusional thought and healthy thought in a bid to differentiate them and strengthen the healthy part of the personality in order to examine the psychotic functioning. Francesco reflected genuinely on the period that had preceded his psychotic explosion and said that he had understood that his flight to megalomania had been his only expedient to create distance from the pain he felt when he realized that he had fallen behind and lost contact with his university friend. After the termination of university, he was very depressed because he has lost every friend. It became clear too that his delusion wish to be adored corresponded to his wanting to restore the ecstatic state of the little child who was venerated by his parents. It was the first child of a first family. It was venerated by his mother, his father, and the aunts also. Gradually, we were able to establish continuity between the state of infantile excitement, which was neither modulated nor contained by his parents, and the development of the delusional dream. Francesco admitted that ever since he was small, success was like a drug to him, and that he sought only to receive continuous gratification from others. At times, some islands of clarity would emerge, followed, however, by moments in which Francesco inside would vanish. His failure to pay constant attention to the emergence of delusional intuitions meant that they constantly recurred. Being captured by the delusion, which was understood as a force that could change reality, fascinated but then terrorized him. This is a dream with delusion transformation. This is well represented in the following dream. He is into a tunnel similar to the one in the underground. He is trying to get outside, and so he has to climb up a long, fanciful flight of steps, similar to those on mirror paintings. He loves painting this page. Once outside, he sees a man who shows him a threatening message. Someone from behind sprays liquid all over him, and he is then grabbed by other men who jump on him and start kicking him. The words of the stranger's message are, "The last 5 minutes will be the worst of your life." From the exaltation from the mirror paintings to persecution. This dream helped to understand Francesco's construction of the delusion. His way of constructing persecution can be traced in the manifest context. The delusion preparation is represented by the Joan Miró-like fanciful flight of steps, that is, by the seductive action and fantasy dissociated from reality. Transforming reality, which corresponds to creating new form as in surrealist painting, is idealized by Francesco. This reminds me of a dream of psychotic patient of Paola, which dreamt of another painting, Salvatore Dalì. It's the same. It becomes Salvatore Dalì, a surrealist painting, and it changes reality. This was a time in his analysis when he would come to his session and tell me about his being delusional that previous day, or he would describe a dream that he defined as psychotic. During the session, we would be able to deconstruct the delusion, and the session would end with a sense of relief. However, transforming the delusion experience during the session, which was similar to working through a dream, was not stable. Unfortunately, Francesco felt relief from the anxiety of the delusional experience, but it would recur because after the session, Francesco would end up forgetting all the work we had done together. This continued for many years. He had forgotten every work in the session. During the summer of the 7th-year analysis, Francesco had a severe psychotic breakdown during his holiday abroad with a foreign girl whom he had started to go out with. The delusion preparation had begun before their departure. Before going on their holiday, the girl had been invited to a party and asked Francesco to go with her, which he did unwillingly. During the party, he had noticed a man, clearly sexually aroused. Francesco had seen his erection, who had begun to chat to the girl. While on holiday, Francesco was convinced that this girl was in a sexualized mental state, that she masturbated or had sex with other men when she would get up at night to go to the toilet. Francesco had kept this idea to himself until one evening when they were having dinner in a little restaurant. It was clear to him that the waiter, who seemed rather intrusive, had been hired to kill him. While reconstructing this episode in these sessions, I thought of the euphoria persecution sequence I had come to recognize. Far from his analysis, his improvement and the new relationship turned into a state of mental expansion that made him feel superior and in conflict with other men. Francesco, we don't want to go to the party, transformed his feeling of exclusion into a terrible condition of sexual betrayal. He thought of the girl as a sex addict who wanted to rid herself of him with the waiter's help. Francesco remembered that his girlfriend, because the delusion flared up, had seemed detached and very interested in going out with her Italian colleagues. A non-psychotic individual in the same condition would have had a dream in which he saw himself being betrayed by his partner, but it would be a dream, not a delusion. Francesco, who was unable to dream, saw the girl sexually aroused at the party and the guy with an erect penis. In the face of his emotional delusion, he demonized the persons that had frustrated him and substituted the concrete reality of the delusion for emotional reality. Had been able to dream the same scene, he would have understood his emotional state and been able to work through it. His return to a severe psychotic state made me see firsthand just how fragile and unsteady his apparent improvement had been. This short romance turned into a maniacal state that inhibited Francesco's ability to think and perceive emotions. Later, around the 9th year of analysis, Francesco began to be more aware of his maniacal state and of his being able to feel special by manipulating reality. In a dream, excitement and falsification were well represented. I was playing pinball and realized that by tipping the machine a little, I was able to get higher and higher scores. I was excited because of my success, but above all for being admired by those present. I was winning and could have continued to do so for hours and hours. A small event made us see clearly how the persecution followed Francesco's state of excitement. He told me he had spoken to his aunt and uncle, whom he was very close to, and who were having an heated discussion. His aunt, annoyed with her husband, remarked that Francesco, unlike her husband, understood her. Francesco, immediately felt a thrill of excitement at this acknowledgement, but then just as immediately he was afraid that his uncle would have been deadly furious with him. On this occasion, too, the same pattern was set in motion. Francesco challenged an omnipotent rival who became a persecutor. This episode certainly draws attention to an Oedipal situation and to wanting to take the father place. It is a psychotic Oedipus, full of violence and deadly revenge. Working with Francesco totally convinced me that a persecutory delusion cannot exist without being preceded by megalomania. My impression was that Francesco had experienced his parents not as a couple, but as two psychological separate people. He had certainly been worshipped by his mother, and he returned this by deeply idealizing her. He thought of her as his true partner, and despite never being aware of this, it is likely that he feared his father's resentment. He probably believed that his father thought of him as a brother as opposed to a son, and perhaps this is why he experienced his mother and his father separately and not as one united couple. At this point in time, now in the 10th year analysis, an important stage in Francesco's life began. He met a girl, Anna, who seemed to have many good qualities. After getting on well for several months, they decided to live together. Anna had a good impact on his life. She motivated him to be more active, pushed him to look for a job, and took him out on that cloud that had kept him withdrawn at home. Naturally, after some years, 1 or 2 years, the relationship with Anna began to be contaminated by the delusion distortion at a certain point. Francesco became very suspicious and thought that Anna was with him only for his money, but he's very poor because the parents pay for his analysis. He doesn't gain anything from some money, but his parents pay for his analysis. His work for making additional students, not rich. When Anna told him she was pregnant, he heard gunshots coming from the street and convinced himself that they were a signal from his persecutors who were celebrating their triumph. This girl had managed to trick him by getting pregnant in order to take possession of his wealth, and would then kill him with the help of his relatives. He had just seen a film in which the main character was assassinated. His delusional anxiety aside, Francesco did not want a child and tried everything to persuade Anna to have an abortion. Then, since she refused to, they decided the pregnancy should go ahead. And when the child, the boy, was born, Francesco grew fond of him and willingly took care of him. I would now like to give a clear picture of this last delusion experience centered on Francesco's family life. The woman he lives with who bore him a son and a relative. I must explain that this woman is Sicilian and has very close ties with her brothers and sister, who moved, is not Sicilian, I changed, it's another south region of Italy, it's Calabria, and was very close ties with her brothers and sisters, who moved to Milan, as she did, a long time ago. The fact is that it's a very close-knit family. Francesco had never tried to conceal his difficulty with these in-laws, whom he did not really understand and who made him feel ill at ease. They belonged to a more modest social and cultural environment than his, which prevented him from developing an empathic relationship with them, but he was not able to have a normal contact with people different from him. He's always thinking that people that he can have contact is similar to him. He doesn't understand that he was from south of Italy, they're different, we are not cultural. At certain point, these mysterious and distant relatives became the characters of a conspiracy against him. They had decided to kill him to seize his wealth. And what greatly perturbed him was that Anna was in on it. It seemed that at this point, Francesco was able to live two separate realities, the delusional one and the normal one. This would begin by his healthy part being frightened by the delusion. His conviction that Anna was leading a double life, one that she shared with him and which he enjoyed, and another that was secret and diabolical, lasted for quite some time. Francesco was sure about his partner being involved in the conspiracy. He had caught her giving him a strange smile and was on the phone and heard her say that the time had come to do a certain thing. In other words, to kill him. He admitted to me that he was unable to sleep at night, that he was afraid of being killed and that he constantly examined his partner's face like an entomologist to understand whether she was a murderess or a caring mother that took good care of her child. At the height of this anxiety, he asked if he could have a fit session before the weekend. And I said yes. The Easter break was coming up. I was worried about him, and with one extra session, I hoped to help him get over this distressing situation. This time, however, I had my serious doubts. Whereas in the past I had analyzed many times the dynamics of delusion, at that time I felt I was without any means to help him. I said to him that when he spoke of his partner as someone who took care of their child, he had in mind a real emotional world. But he would then create another delusional world in which she became inhuman, a murderess who was thirsty for money. I added that there was a continuous passing from one world to another, so that the two opposite and incompatible perceptions existed together, the good mother and the killer partner. The difference between the real human world and the delusional inhuman world may have served to help him distinguish between the delusion and reality. I shall not go into whether Francesco used this attempt of mine to distinguish between the delusion and reality, but in the following session he told me that he did not go to the bed where he had been sleeping alone, but returned that night to his partner's side and that of his child to feel some human warmth. During the following session, Francesco said he realized that he had a biocular vision of reality. I noted that he expressed himself with great precision. He did not say binocular, but had used the term biocular to signify that this vision lacked integration, and thus the two visions, delusion and real, remained distinct and separate. Both, however, retained the same sensorial quality of reality. After this delusional episode, Francesco seemed more interested in unlocking the mystery of his delusional transformation. In every session, he would take up the theme of delusion without dropping the subject. In the past, he's forgotten every session, another session, turning back for discussing his delusion. In this case, every session he came back to his delusion. I felt at this time he really wanted to rid himself of the seduction and colonization's psychotic part for good. In the meantime, he had become better at speaking to and cooperating with his parents. He helped his mother manage their real estate, and when he could, he assisted his father. In the following period, hints of delusion were still there, but discreetly, like passing clouds. Another important aspect of the analytical work was Francesco's difficulty understanding others' intention and behavior. Francesco was so sure of his mental organization that when reality did not match his schematic expectation, he plunged into confusion and paranoia. When he misjudged people, he immediately felt disorientated and invaded by catastrophic anxiety. At this point, he would demonize reality, and people would appear bad and hostile towards him. Much work was also done on Francesco's inability to understand reality, above all emotional experiences, in themselves rather complex, and which he seemed to have no experience of. It was as if he had been used to observing the world from a certain distance, without any real participation, cataloging it using simple attributions that more often than not were moral, good, bad, empathic, non-empathic, familiar, stranger. Luckily though, Francesco was intelligent and versatile. He was well educated and had been selected to do highly professional work. Francesco often drew and painted, a hobby he had pursued since childhood and which he had kept up during his analysis. He had also enrolled at art school but left without qualification. At this point, he no longer felt spiritless, so believing, as he had done in the past, that someday he would become a great artist, the grandeur of his ideation now having significantly lessened. However, even at an advanced stage of his analysis, Francesco suddenly became delusional. He felt frightened at an exhibition where he had sold 2 of his paintings. He had heard references to, as well as actual death threats against him. It was as though he thought that when he was successful, he invoked the wrath of the gods, offended by his superciliousness, almost as if he had defied God to dethrone him. It was clear to me that his persecutory ideation strengthened when he achieved success. There was an immediate reactivation of the antagonistic power of a vindicative part that threatened him for his resourcefulness. He became very grandiose also in these poor things. It seems that Francesco mixed up the legitimate success and megalomaniacal triumphs which triggered the persecutory response. That is, he mistook what is permitted for what is transgressive. Once again, I realized that I needed to explore in great depth this area of Francesco's mind. I needed to fully prepare for plowing land that I was under the impression had been cleared but which was still rocky underneath. Final part. During a session, in the last part of his analysis, Francesco spoke to me about a further delusional crisis. He told me that while leaving this session the previous day, he had seen a big car outside that was there for him. In fact, the car left as soon as he had detected it. Then he went to the swimming pool and after a while he saw 2 women having a lively chat with one another. He was sure that they were criticizing him and referring to the fact that he had gone to the pool just to look at the girls. A man there was wearing a t-shirt with an eye inscribed in a triangle. For Francesco, this carried disquieting but clear overtones. I was really dispirited during that session, having had to note that once more Francesco had relapsed into psychosis. I just said to him, without being too convinced, that since he had told me that those were his days off, perhaps a holiday meant an absence of thought, losing touch with himself and being taken back once more to the alien world. The following day, Francesco took me by complete surprise with his unexpected ability to process what had happened. He said he realized that for him, having almost reached the middle age and having a son, going to the swimming pool to high up girls was absurd, but this was not the point. Instead, going to the swimming pool meant looking for mental excitement. The swimming pool, therefore, representing the land of milk and honey, built however in opposition to the world of relations. That day, he had been invited by a group of friends to spend the afternoon with them, but he turned the invitation down, seeing the pool as an alternative and superior world of pleasure. He told me that in the past I had repeated to him many times over the persecution delusion followed his maniacal excited state. On this occasion, however, he was convinced that this concept had come to his mind without me telling him. He had listened to me on those previous occasions, acknowledged that I had said, but nothing stayed with him. Only then did he realize that he is creating a world of excited pleasure wise to wipe out all human relation, and he understood that the result following this operation was catastrophic. This step was very important because it meant that Francesco could finally understand the nature of psychotic excitement and its effect. Not until he was able to visualize psychotic development as a two-stage event, exciting and persecutory, that was a product of one and the same mental states, could he manage to contain the delusion. In fact, he had told me many times that he found it difficult to catch the initial aspect of the psychotic transformation in time, to defend himself from it. After this session, Francesco's perception of the insidiously dangerous nature of that mental excitement was sharpened, and he began to control it and escape its power. Prior to the persecution delusion, Francesco had had an individualistic vision of the world and a narcissistic, grandiose projection of the self. Ever since he was a child, he felt superior to others, seduced by maternal appreciation and paternal license, and he saw his pair as rivals. The good-bad, friends-foes, divide stemmed from there. Francesco returned many times to the past to understand what had made him feel persecuted by his partner's southern relatives. It seems that he had found it difficult to integrate their good and their frustrating parts. In other words, he had been unable to hold inside the idea that people are human beings with specific limits and not diabolic objects. Important work that Francesco did was comparing subsequent delusions in order to identify the roots and the constants of this delusional construction. At this stage of his analysis, it set my mind at rest to see Francesco grow as a free person, no longer seduced by the anxiety and the megalomania of the past. His healthy part had developed progressively, and Francesco had acquired the ability to reflect on and examine that occurred in his mind. In one session during the last part of his analysis, he told me that before falling ill, he had understood nothing about others, because his only purpose had been to make himself liked. He had been unable to consider others and understand what they were like. Now he felt able to do so and learn from experience. In the last period, it was period to see Francesco grow No. Yeah. I read it. Caring for his son had enriched his affective world and distanced him from new delusional productions. His days were now busy, as he would get up early in the morning and help Anna to take care of their child. He would often look at his child and regularly think about how different his own childhood had been from his son's. I felt he had treasured the analytical work in his childhood experience and that he could want to be an affectionate present father who could positively contribute to his child's growth and development. His son rewarded him with affection and the fact that he was growing up well. Clinical considerations. Francesco's clinical story enables us to understand how the psychotic process develops progressively and unpredictably. Once one pathological construction was demolished, another immediately appeared, and all the work done up to that point being to no avail. Positive was the fact that Francesco slowly became aware of his overpowering tendency to replace the world of reality with that of the imagination. He therefore understood that he needed another mind to help him circumscribe the pathological process and develop his healthy part, which was not particularly distinct from his ill part. As I said to him once, his mind was like a sieve, allowing thought of every kind to pass through indiscriminately. In my description of this case, I have underlined above all how Francesco deceived himself by creating an alternative reality. It is clear from my way of working that only on rare occasions did I formulate symbolic or transverse interpretations, as they would not have been understood and would have added to the patient's state of confusion. I work instead to describe and analyze his psychotic mental functioning and would describe his mental functioning when the little worm, that is what he called his aptitude for reality transformation, when the little worm would get the better of him. As can be inferred from my account, I work mainly on the delusion formation. It was clear in my mind that in Francesco's delusion, the distinction between internal and external reality had not only been obliterated, but psychic reality had been replaced with sensory reality. He could hear and see from his mind. His delusion was characterized by confusion between external and internal, and by concrete fact quality, his psychic being unable to free itself of it or let transform it gives it sensory natura. One session, Francesco said to me that in his room there was a micro cameras, his enemy, to see and explore him. And I say to him, how do you can see this camera? Can you bring me in the session one camera and I can see the same view? And he said, no, it's impossible. Why is it impossible? They are so little, very little, that cannot be seen. And I said, and you can see? I can see with the eye of my mind. So he can see with the eyes of her mind. So, allora, comunque, his psyche being unable to free itself, let alone transform it, given its sensory nature. Had Francesco been able to confine himself to dreaming, he would have understood that the dream represented an unconscious conflict for example with Anna's relatives, and could therefore have contained his fear in a processable symbolic narration. Instead, his delusion was a sensory construction. He heard and saw his persecutors, also the camera of his persecutors, unlike the representation of the dream entirely, which can be transformed and understood. The delusion is purely sensory and therefore has no access to representation and symbolization. It is made up of symbolic equation, Segal, and it is this sense that the Bion's inversion of the alpha function should, I believe, be understood. In the delusion, the imagination, which in normal condition conveys an ideative or representative content, is transformed outside awareness into beta elements, that is, into pure sensorial elements. It can see through the mind's eyes. The delusion availing of the psychotic mind's capacity to make imaginative thought sensory. The delusion cannot enter dream work to produce a transformative psychic experience such as fantasy or thought, because it corresponds to a non-thought, to bios minus k. How the mind constructs the delusion must be explained repeatedly to the patient so that he becomes aware of this. The specific difficulty of this particular therapy was the fact that the delusion remained silent, always ready, however, to violently reactivate. Despite free intervals, the pathogenic potential of the delusion remained intact, prepared at any moment to re-explode. It was important that Francesco and I, despite the presence of delusional themes, were able to reconstruct his childhood experience and see that psychotic process had been formed in a grandiose infantile withdrawal. Francesco grew up in a well-to-do, middle-class cultivated family without any evident traumas. Despite this, he was not a normal little boy. There were episodes in his childhood that had worried his teacher and his parents, such as running away from school, sometimes with an adventure companion, to do great daring deeds or defy adults. Once he had hidden for such a long time that his parents, naturally worried, called the police. The first time we met, Francesco told me that he had wonderful parents who had never scolded or punished him. Afterwards, I understood what this meant. His parents has not been able to provide the necessary frustration or to structure his personality. Francesco had lived in a grandiose infantile withdrawal that his parents knew nothing of. On several occasions, however, they had been concerned, as they had taken him to a psychologist to whom the child said that he scolded and tried to beat his parents. The psychologist did not consider this a problem and instead advised Francesco's mother to see a therapist. As a wild psychotherapist, I think. I was convinced that Francesco, who for a long time had lived in a fantasy world, could not bear the frustration and hurdles of real life. While growing up, conflicts proved to be harder than his constant state of exaltation could tolerate, and at a certain point, hatred toward frustrating objects stained his world with somber colors. Fundamental in this long and complex therapy was that neither Francesco nor I had lost faith in the analytical work. Even when intense crisis would wipe out all our prior work. When each relapse occurred, I tried to understand what had happened, what had brought on the episode, and how his mind worked. Francesco really was a good patient, attached to his analysis, collaborating always, thus making it possible to discuss and rebuild what has happened. Throughout the therapy, I had always hoped that once a structure had been clarified, the delusion could be deconstructed and treated like a dream, which, once understood, can be forgotten. Unfortunately, I was not dealing with a dream, but sensory delusion reality, and continued to ask myself how it could be transformed, given that it had a sensory, a concrete nature. This is not, you have to skip the note. A concrete nature. I should like to make just a brief comment here on the transference. During the first part of Francesco's therapy, the transference was a psychotic nature. Francesco projected distrust and persecutorousness into me to the extent that he considered me as a potential ally of his enemies. The psychotic transference, which on one occasion visibly manifested, could have distanced him from the analysis, but the danger was averted. Only later, when basic trust had been established between us and Francesco's psychotic part was less dominant, did the transfer take a neurotic type quality? He had a paternal transference. We discuss this kind of transference with an evident Oedipal hue that repeated the childhood relationship with his parents, his father in particular. He even began to experience with me a relationship, admiration mixed with competition and imitation. This experience with Francesco made me understand that analytic therapy for a psychotic patient should not be limited to treating the symptom only, that is, hallucinations or delusions, extremely destabilizing as they may be, but it should favor the patient's affective development and this acquisition of tools to deal with life and develop a true personality. It is clear that Francesco had, for various reasons, preserved a very infantile and naive character. Having lived for a long time in a fantasy world, it seemed he had been unable to develop strength of character by a continuous experience in relation with significant others. Lastly, we come to the dreams. In the beginning, Francesco's dreams were of psychotic nature. They did not convey a comprehensible narration. They were fragmented and concrete. That is, they were in line with this condition of suffering and its psychic fragmentation. Later on, however, they displayed a narrative continuity, and some dreams could describe to the patient his psychotic functioning. For example, the dream in which Miro's flight of steps appeared to describe to the patient his very own construction. The nature of the delusion, no, ho salto, I'm skipping or not? This kind of dream is quite typical during the therapy of psychosis, appearing when there is an improvement, also in other psychotic patients who undergo analytic treatment. It means that the mind is beginning to be aware of the mechanism of the delusion transformation, and he can therefore begin to describe it. In these dreams, the mad part is represented by a figure who transforms reality, such as the artist Joan Miró. This type of dream is important because through it, the delusional experience can be shown to involve the patient's psychic participation and to be a construction of his mind, when the experience it a sudden and concrete event coming from outside. When the patient experiences it as a sudden and concrete event. The nature of the delusion can thus be better analyzed, and with the patient's help, his uncontainable and unstoppable nature modified. Francesco's dream progressively change until they become similar to neurotic dreams, with symbolic language that enables suitable interpretation to be made to unveil implicit emotional meaning. This means that Francesco had begun to make his unconscious operate to represent, albeit in a disguised fashion, psychic reality and emotional states. Then transference dreams were brought, which could not have appeared earlier, not only because Francesco was unable to experience me, the analyst, as a person who was emotionally tied to him, but also because the transference is formed via symbolic operation which had been unable to carry out prior to then.
Thank you very much, Dr. De Masi, for the presentation. I think it helps us hear and see and understand the way you work and the way you used your theoretical orientation in therapy. And now I am very honored to introduce Orna Wasserman. Orna Wasserman is a clinical psychologist and training psychoanalyst and teaches in many psychotherapy programs where she teaches, among the many topics, the treatment of psychotic states. She's also a dear friend and colleague, which is a pleasure to work with. Orna, please.
Okay. I'm deeply grateful to Dr. De Masi for his case presentation, which shows the arduous task of psychotherapy as well as the hope for progress. I find the concept of psychic withdrawal extremely helpful. It is a binocular concept, tying together the structural point of view with a subjective one, placing the psychotic break in context of a long-standing developmental process. I would like to focus on the subjective angle and its relation to the structural one. The subjective point of view entails deciphering the subjective feelings and thoughts as they are experienced by the person. I would like to share Daniel Meckler's talk with Joanna Greenberg, the author of the autobiographical novel I Never Promised You Rose Garden, to illustrate how well this concept of withdrawal unifies both the structural and the experience near perspective. In addition, we can see how essential the binocular view is to rescue one from psychosis. אם אפשר לכבות את כדי שנוכל לראות? את האור כאן.
I was in New York, sitting on a bus, and there it was again, the whole business, right down. I was schizophrenic. And I said to myself, wait a minute.
And by this time, your therapist had already died, right?
Oh, yeah. Hey, what's this all about? Well, schizophrenics don't do that.
Meaning don't take a look at themselves from the outside and say, hey, what's going on here? Have a very sane and rational conversation with yourself.
And I said to myself, mother's little sweetheart. Let's figure this out. Aha, you forgot what it was like. You had the desire to escape somewhere, have you? Is mother's little sweetheart wanting to go someplace else?
Would Frida talk that way to you?
No, she was much gentler. Suffer a little smarter, will you? So we suffered a little smarter. Me and my brains.
And you didn't end up back in the hospital?
No.
We can see how the wish for withdrawal is the first structure and experience sign of the psychosis to be. From a structural point of view, the withdrawal is from reality and from thought as a tool for experiencing and assimilating life. I cite, I had realized that Francesco did not use thought, but functioned by means of constant sudden revelations. Psychic reality had been replaced with sensory reality. He could hear and see from his mind. Psychosis looks for signs and symbols neither as symbolic nor as metaphorical ways of communicating, but as bearers of messages of truth. From a subjective experiential point of view, why would that be? We are reminded of prophets and miracle makers who are able to use earthly phenomena for divine messages. From a mundane perspective, we are dealing with an immediate, intuitive understanding, so-called, of reality. All of us have moments like this, where we notice some connection, have some revelation of matters as they are, be they faulty or correct. These moments have the charm of being attuned with some truth or essence. I've been wondering about the nature of this mode of being. Thought and meditation are, as the word suggests, our mediated contact with the world. The gap enables a perspective needed for symbolic thought and perspective in general. In contrast, sensory reality is our immediate and unmediated contact with our surroundings. Hallucination is developmentally, as Freud put it, some intermediate way of being. When the sensory reality frustrates, the child manages to hallucinate satisfaction as an intermediate step between sensory fulfillment and frustration and a to-be thought, which takes reality into account. When our immediate contact with the world proves unbearable for our thinking and sensing apparatus, we are in a position to withdraw into a sensory mode of being, either temporarily or permanently. Why is this important? I would like to suggest that the psychotic process is linked to a threat of living without immediate contact to other people. The regression into the fantasy world and the sensory mode of existence is an attempt to defend against the unbearable pain related to a potentially dangerous and isolating existence, while at the same time it is an attempt to repair such an unbearable threat through connecting to the sensory mode. Tragically, it ends in being lonely and alienated. I cite from the first lecture, the psychotic parts take us over and leads to a desert land where each and every relation with a human being is erased. Ferenczi, again, investigated those moments when we are traumatized, incapable of dealing with the world, and arrived at the same conclusion. Our psychic apparatus withdraws to a primitive, archaic way of functioning, rooted in our physical being. In Ferenczi's words, in moments of great need, when the psychic system proves to be incapable of an adequate response, the primordial psychic powers are aroused. In such moments, when the psychic system fails, the organism begins to think. There is ample research showing the disastrous impact of traumata and its correlation with psychosis. Dr. de Masi's contribution highlights the disastrous consequences of long-standing psychological estrangement, even without trauma. The impact of not belonging. I cite, always lacking in him was the idea of basic brotherhood that ties people together beyond conflict. Francie identified the crux of the trauma, not only the terrible act of the aggressor, but at the moment where the victim finds itself totally lonely, a loneliness which Frieda von Reichmann managed to describe so profoundly. That is the moment the victim falls back into a mode where the sensory and physical organism takes over. I cite Ferenczi again. Paternal hypnosis equals fear of being killed. Maternal hypnosis equals fear of being abandoned by the mother. The latter feels just as deadly as an aggressive threat to life. Only then, when the real world as it is becomes so unbearable and feelings of despair that things might ever change for the better become so absolute, only then does the ego withdraw from reality, though without giving up itself. Unfortunately, once this withdrawal from reality has taken place, its initial compensatory reward and its further alienation of the individual tend, as Dr. de Masi described, to spread and invade more and more the functioning of the mental life. Ferenczi again, but if one has succeeded in freeing oneself from psychic unpleasure with the aid of such a daydream, then a weak point for the entire future is established, to which the ego, feelings, easily regress as soon as something unpleasurable occurs. Let's go to Francesco and take a closer view at the psychotic break. Francesco lives abroad without friends and relatives under the delusion or drive to be recognized as a savior of mankind. If we peel away the psychotic firework, we are struck by his impelling need for human contact of a certain kind. He needs to be recognized as savior and to win girls. He's defeated by the Arab peer when the latter leaves the party with his girl. Francesco seeks help with a Sicilian Italian, clearly trying to threaten the Arab, hinting he's backed up by the mafia. Well, mafia is after all not only a threatening organization, but also the brotherhood for those brave men, mafioso, who belong to it. Francesco is devastated by the silence of the Arab. He's not meeting his eyes. He's not objected, not registered, not seen. Being the center of revenge or persecution of the CIA and KGB, also a biocular combination, I would say, is better than being ignored and not being seen. This non-existence in the mind and psyche of the other seems to be a fatal blow to his existence and at the root of Francesco's experience, already as a child. In the 5th year of analysis, Francesco is able to dream and communicate about this dream. He dreams that he's at the cinema with his parents and some of their friends. Let's note that he's seemingly not alone. Suddenly he poos, everyone notices it, but no one asks him about it. Can there be a more banal description of sensorially not being seen, heard, or smelled? Francesco connects this dream to his recollection that his parents never confronted him. Apparently, it doesn't seem so traumatic compared to traumata like incest, abuse, or violence. But, to quote Bakhtin, for the world, and consequently for a human being, there is nothing more terrible than a lack of response. I quote Dr. de Masi again. The first time we met, Francesco told me that he had wonderful parents who had never scolded or punished him. Afterwards, I understood what this meant. His parents had not been able to provide the necessary frustrations or structure his personality. Francesco had lived in a grandiose infantile withdrawal that his parents knew nothing of. Living in a world his parents knew nothing of, isn't it a lonely existence for a child, being further intensified by weak-felt parents not able to confront him? Ornstein stresses the importance of structuring idealized parents as crucial for a stable self-development, its absence having grave consequences similar to neglect and even abuse. Being venerated, idealized, means not being seen and heard as one is, with poo, spits, and other vital sense and potentials. Worshipping actually covers up being not seen and robs Francesco of the opportunity to belong to an admired parent, which is crucial for the ability to deal with real life. Dr. de Masi gently enables Francesco this belonging to an admired grown-up who sees him today, as well as seeing him retrospectively. I quote, "It was important that Francesco and I, despite the presence of the delusion themes, were able to reconstruct his childhood experience and see that the psychotic process had been formed in a grandiose infantile withdrawal. I would say that the withdrawn child Francesco is finally being seen by an admired grown-up to which he feels connected. I quote, "He even began to experience with me a relationship of admiration mixed with competition and imitation. Why is this being seen so significant? We know the crucial part self-psychology places on mirroring, being seen. I would like to elaborate the relevance of this point to Dr. de Masi's conceptualization. I cite, the delusion avails of the psychotic mind's capacity to make imaginative thought sensory. How the mind constructs the delusion must be explained repeatedly to the patient so he becomes aware of this. Is explanation the crucial factor? Is it helping the patient to be aware and careful when he feels the danger of his little worm? Is it a way of enabling the patient to look at himself from another point of view, realizing his binocular vision? Thinking about the sensory mode of being as an outcry for unmediated close contact with a human being, I would add that seeing Francesco's way of experiencing is the essential antidote to his withdrawal. The repair is done at the level of the rupture. The sensory element of seeing instead of imaginatively thinking is being addressed and dissolved by being really seen and heard by another mind. We can see the impact of the polyphonic recognition of Francesco's two worlds even when we are quite unsure about its impact on his reality testing. I quote, I added that there was a continuous passing from one world to another, so that opposite and incompatible perception existed together. I shall not go into whether Francesco used this attempt of mine to distinguish between the delusion and reality, but the following session he told me that he returned to his partner's side and to his child to feel some human warmth. I would like to suggest that Dr. de Masi offers Francesco not just understanding of the psychotic structure and its triggers, but also hope for being part of mankind. After all, if I may be bold, the psychoanalyst Franco decided to name this patient Francesco, a binocular version of this name, and a warm brotherly reaching out towards him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Orna, for a beautiful discussion. We have a couple of minutes. I wanted to say when I read the presentation and I read afterwards Orna's discussion, I thought that Dr. De Masi is giving an intra-psychic perspective, right? Orna was giving the subjective perspective. And I thought, what about the intersubjective perspective of a psychotic patient and what is happening in the therapy? Now, when I thought about it, I thought that the two psychotic breakdowns during therapy was the first ones when he was going on vacation, when he was separate from De Masi, from the therapy. That was, he was exacerbated. And I think it's going with Orna, and I think a very maybe traumatic, there is a traumatic separateness. When a psychotic has an early traumatic separation from his mother, maybe from his father, and he cannot stand separateness. The way he deals with separateness when he doesn't have the psychic apparatus to deal with this is by withdrawing to a psychic apparatus. And I think why De Masi didn't talk about his relations and didn't react to the fact that maybe the part of the trigger of the exacerbation was the separation from him, the separation from analyst, was because there is a very strong transference with no separateness with psychotic patients. And Dr. De Masi was not, when we talk about people who are in a neurotic mood, we are talking about relationships. When we're talking about psychotic people, we are talking about primal unity. And I think what De Masi did was, I was not talking about separating, but lending his mind and his heart and his affection to the patient and allowing him to grow up together with him. What didn't happen with his parents. That's why he didn't speak about the relationship. And it lacked into me, and that's what Orna was trying to say. Because he said, Dr. De Masi says, he needed another mind to help him. And I think he gave him his mind. He gave him his mind in order so he will be able to grow up with another mind, with another relationship, with another close human being, affectionate human being. And that's what made him possible to grow up. And that's why I thought you don't speak about the relationship, because it's not a regular relationship. It's a primal unity. And every time this primal unity breaks, there's an exacerbation. But then you go back again. And another thing, I thought about a dream, about the tunnel dream. I think he said he was born too prematurely. I think when he was in the tunnel, it's like was he in the womb, and then when he went out to the outside world too prematurely, there was too much separateness, then he was getting attacked, then he was getting paranoid. So I think, I heard you again today, that's something I thought about. So now we can speak about other.
I will make a commenting on the film we have seen before, because it shows us a very important problem. This Joanna Greenberg is a very intelligent woman. He had a very complicated, a very useful delusion to understand, because he created a world of perfection. He had gods that protected her during the first phase of her psychosis. The second part was terrible because the same gods were persecuting her. But he says something very interesting, because he says that also in this moment he has the danger to become psychotic, because something, her imagination, go towards psychosis. But in this case, she says to her, "What is this?" and is able to distinguish psychotic word to normal word. So he doesn't become psychotic. So what is the communication? That psychosis lasts all the time during a life. With my patient, I have been misdiagnosed for 16 years, and also when we analyze and finished a film, or delusional film, another film began. So the mind of psychotic patient is ever under this danger, and this is very clear, in this interview.
Joanna Greenberg is, you know who she is? She's the patient from the. I never promised you a rose garden.
Yeah, it was cured from Reichmann.
Was in Chestnut Lodge. He was treated by Frieda von Reichmann. Orna.
Yes, I would like to add a question. It's actually a question I forward from the audience in the intermission, but it has to do with what you have been saying, because the seduction of the psychosis is very clear and it stays for the whole life because it has succeeded. But the question was, why is it that these gods, which in the first stage seduct you, get to be a horrible world afterwards and get to be so persecutory? Have you any thought about it? I had some thoughts, but I'm interested in what you...
I have some thought, because if you... It is like a drug. When we take a pill, a drug, for the first time, cocaine, heroin, you are happy, no?
Okay.
No, happy. You are against pain, against depression, no? You are more happy. After the drug control you and become your master, no? In order to free themselves from that mafia, because Bion and also Meltzer and also other psychoanalyst Rosenfeld described this psychotic organization with mafia. In the first time, mafia, like you wrote in this comment, offer a brothership, but after you are prisoner of the mafia. If you try to go out of the mafia can kill you. So the second part is when the patient tries to go out of the powers of mafia. The psychotic organization try to kill him. It's very scared of this problem because the problem of psychosis is the contrast between the truth and the false truth. No? If you give yourself to a false truth, you are prisoner of a politically, come si dice, una organization, criminal organization. No?
You no longer have freedom of mind.
Yes, because you are leaving yourself to a criminal organization, and the criminal organization does not allow you to be free again. So it's complicated.
Franco, but isn't it right when you feel lonely and separated and you feel detached from the real world, from the good world, then it is better to belong to a bad world than not to belong to a world at all? So when she felt lonely, she went to New York and she felt alone, and she said, listen, and now I had a chance to go back to my I'm going to be alone, and I think it's better to be in a bad world than be with no world at all. So when you lose the contact with the good world, with a psychoanalyst mind, with a psychoanalyst, with his heart, then you better go to the bad world. And I think that's because it's worse to not to belong and fall down with no world at all. So that's how you have a choice.
Johann Greenberg was a traumatized child. If we read her book, we can see that he was traumatized child. But he had a childhood withdrawal very long, in which he lived when he was with other child. He's not communicated with also because he had a deep retreat in the withdrawal, psychotic withdrawal. After 3 years, I think, of therapy from Reichmann, he improved very much. He also, Frida from Reichmann wanted to. I can speak again.
When we speak of psychosis, obviously, in my opinion, we have to have in mind the omnipotence. The omnipotence, one of my patients, she was the girl who had the strange. She, at the beginning, was Lucifer, the angel most loved by God. But this omnipotence, on the contrary, transforms you in evil, in the devil. There is a change. So there is the persecution. You goes to the inferno.
Because the first time the hallucination are grateful, grateful. They speak about the superiority, of the patient. You are a god. We are like a god. We are a very intelligent. We can have all things of the world. After the second time, the same voices speak to the patient. You are not like an angel. You act like a devil because you destroyed the mind, destroyed the world. So is also in 2 times. The first time is omnipotent. The second time is accusing. So the hallucination are bad and terrific.
So the second time has in it a hint of the reality, because it says you have destroyed your mind.
There is a superego, psychotic superego. The first part, the psychotic superego is enhancing, the omnipotence of the patient. The second time, the same superego changes and convinces the patient that is like a devil. I remember a case that I supervisioned. The name of this patient was Angel, in Italian. And he had the first episode was that he had sex intercourse with Jesus. So it's very high. It's fiancé of Jesus is the best thing on the world. And another psychotic episode is very important. It's an angel. She can do everything. The second part of this delusion is she was a devil because she was had destroyed all things, the mind, the power, the same good. And she cannot go out the house. They cannot go to the session because he thought that she was a devil and the other man would shoot at her. He was very, very traumatized. So it's true.
First of all, thank you, both of you, for your very, very thought-provoking lectures and discussion. I would like to share a thought and see what you think about it, because what I thought with regard to the whole question of trauma, I mean, trauma can be many things. I think not being seen is trauma, but I think there is a very special combination here of, on the one hand, not being seen, smelled, and looked at, Orna, like you noticed, but on the other hand, being entrapped in a grandiose savior fantasy of his mother. And I would like to hear if you have any response or any thoughts about it, about the way that there is a projection of a very strong fantasy, and very confusing to be absent on the one hand, and on the other hand to be present in a very way, and grandiose way for this man. That's just one thought, and then I have another question connected to technique, because you were dealing with the narcissistic injury, but I did not see how you were dealing with it. I mean, I understand you're not working in the transference, but can you, do you comment on how the grandiose fantasy or the psychotic part starts to move on in response to the narcissistic injury, so that he can see when this defense is trying to create itself? Do you do that? It wasn't quite clear from what you...
I think that every patient is different from one another, no? So I think that in every suffering, in every illness, there is a trauma. We have to think what kind of trauma is. No? Because there is psychotic patients that had violent trauma. Violent. Paola, come si dice corvi? Corvi, come si dice in inglese? Corvo. Corvim. In inglese crow. I read about a patient in which the delusion was that she was assaulted, persecuted by crows. No? And the therapist discovered that he was sexually molested. He had assaults from many times with a man, and this happened under a tree with crows. No. So the trauma is inscribed in the delusion. But in other cases, there are not evident trauma. But I agree with who believes that also the absent father and mother is a trauma. No? In these cases, this patient has a maniacal father. Father treated him like a brother. We are very great. You, the patient Francesco, you are very intelligent. You understand me. Your mother doesn't understand me, but you, Francesco, you understand me. So he was totally identified with the grandiosity of his father. The mother loved him in an idealistic way. He was the first son of a very big family. He had many aunts, so he was always performing. This was very, very intelligent. So I think that in this case, the trauma is a special one. It was pushed in a grandiose mood, no? But in the comment of my colleague, the problem is what is the after effect of the trauma. In the Ferenczi vision, the trauma is to be abandoned by parents, to be not seen by parents, no? It's true. But Ferenczi says that in this case, the child...
Masi region. In the Masi region.
No.
You said in the Ferenczi region, now we are talking about the Masi region.
No, I'm talking about Ferenczi, who says that the patient regress to a primitive state of mind. And this is a big question in psychoanalysis, because we have to distinguish the primitive state of mind as pathological state of mind. Because if you have a primitive state of mind, we can help the patient to go toward adult state of mind. If you have a pathological state of mind, you have to work with the patient in order to put him outside this pathological mind. This is why I'm different with my colleague, because I think that we have a pathological state of mind. The psychic withdrawal is a pathological state of mind, it's not a primitive state of mind. So we have to hardly work with the patient in order that he help to distinguish pathological state of mind from normal state of mind. Greenberg said this: I am able, not all schizophrenic patients are able to think about what I'm thinking about. No, they want to distinguish this. No,
but if you have a pathological state of mind, we have to stop. Okay, we have to stop. People are okay. So I want to thank you again, Orna and Dr. de Masi. The next session is a clinical one. And the moderator of the session will be Yoel Miller, who is a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst in the Israel Institution of Psychoanalysis. He's a teacher and also a close friend and colleague. So at 1:15, Lina? Okay.